So here is the Student Acceptable Use Policy in the Student's Rights and Responsibilities Handbook. It is on the very first page, and this part basically describes why we have an AUP, what it's for, the consequences for not following the AUP, and also describing that they need to sign a form in order to be able to use technology, because it is a privilege and not a right. And so it describes that the parents and students are responsible for their actions as far as on the internet, in a school, or using any technology that provided by the school. Here is, in the back of the handbook, here's the form that they have to sign. So basically saying the student and the parent has to sign saying that they have read the acceptable use policy, that they understand that if they misuse or abuse any of that, the terms and conditions in there, that they could get consequences up to being expelled or even legal action if it does go that far. They can agree or not agree, but if they do not agree, then they will not get use of any technology or internet while they're at school, which is kind of a disadvantage if technology is being used. It also gives some parent tips, which I really like, which talks about that the parent should be monitoring the student when they're not at school, when they're using the internet as well, and that they should talk to their kids about internet safety, social media, and the best way to be safe and positive when using the internet. Also, no student will be able to use technology or log in. They will not have a login until this is signed. This is the acceptable use policy in the employee handbook, and it's actually much more complicated in about 4 pages. And basically it describes why we have an AUP. It talks about that students and staff are responsible for using internet and their choices while using school devices. It says that teachers are trained to talk to students about internet safety, the best ways to use the technology, how to run their classroom and manage it with technology now in it, and that they are responsible for monitoring what the student is doing. Further down, it talks about the fact that the internet is a privilege and not a right, that it can be taken away from anybody, even employees, and it talks about the consequences for that. It also repeats and clearly states that the staff is responsible. So every classroom, if you're using technology, your teacher is responsible for making sure that the internet is being used correctly, safely, and that whatever lesson plan that you have with technology involved, that you're able to manage and monitor it while it's happening. Later on, it talks about the responsibilities and your privileges and more about what's expected of you specifically. And then all the way at the bottom, it talks about what could happen to both you, an employee, and students if any of this is broken or not followed. Lastly, we also have to sign a sheet that we have to turn in the beginning of the year stating that we know our rights and our privileges and that we will not break them. One of the best ways I feel to make sure that we share this information with students is not only giving them the handbook and saying you have to read this, because honestly a lot of them will not and they'll sign the paper. But before they receive their sign-ins, our TRT, our technology resource teacher in the school, goes from classroom to classroom and reaches every single student and explains to them what the AUP is and what their consequences and rules and rights and responsibilities are when using internet and technology. I think that's really important because for students, they have way different things on their plates than trying to read an AUP and figuring it out. So being able to teach that to every student and make it very clear what the expectation is important. So there definitely should be some training in PD about how to monitor and instruct your classroom with technology. One of the biggest things they talk about in the standards in digital citizenship is make sure you're always modeling what the student should be doing. So if the student should be doing it, they shouldn't see you do anything that you shouldn't be doing also. So just make sure you're modeling the correct behavior at all times. And lastly, just a little tip about the expectations in your classroom. If you're about to do a lesson, let's say on Twitter, and they are tweeting things, before you start, model what an appropriate response would be and what an inappropriate response would be, so that they are always knowing very clearly and from you what the expectation is and what is not okay. And finally, for some sources, I use the Common Sense Education website to talk about implementation. I use the Technology Coach Standards to talk about the modeling and what you should be doing in your classroom. I used my employee handbook to show you our AUP, and I also used the Student Rights and Responsibilities handbook to show you the student AUP.